Millions of taps across Israel are running right now, and almost nobody is questioning what's coming out of them. It looks clear, it feels normal, and for most people, it's just part of the morning routine. But behind that everyday habit, a darker question is quietly hanging in the air. What if the real danger isn't the missiles in the sky, but the water already inside their homes? In the chaos of Iran's latest missile barrage, one category of targets slipped under the radar for most of the world: the pipes, plants, and pumping stations that keep Israel's cities alive. Reports and footage have already shown water mains blasted open near Tel Aviv, streets turned into rivers, and key parts of the network abruptly shut down to stop the flooding. On the surface, it looked like another brutal but familiar scene in a region that has lived with war for decades. But this time, what happened after the impact may matter more than the explosion itself. To understand why, you have to look at what Iran has been doing over the last few weeks. This wasn't a single random strike. It was part of a systematic campaign of pressure, with Iran aiming missiles and drones not just at military bases, but at infrastructure, energy facilities, communications hubs, and now water systems. In other words, the things civilians rely on every hour of every day. And when you start hitting water infrastructure, the line between a military tactic and a civilian nightmare gets dangerously thin. Modern cities simply don't survive without clean, treated water. That's true in Tel Aviv, in Bnei Brak, in Haifa, and everywhere in between. Israel's water system, like most national networks, runs on a combination of high-pressure pipes, treatment plants, and chemical storage facilities that keep raw water safe to drink. Those plants aren't bunkers, they're industrial sites, usually designed for efficiency, not for withstanding missile strikes. When a missile or a cluster submunition punches into that network, you don't just get a broken pipe. You get a cascade of potential failures, flooding, cutoffs, and, if the wrong tanks are hit at the wrong time, contamination. That's what makes this new phase so dangerous. In earlier attacks, the visible problem was simple: water stopped flowing. Videos from central Israel have already shown burst mains, water shooting into the air, and emergency teams scrambling to shut valves just to stop streets from being swallowed. People could see the damage. They knew something was wrong the moment they opened the tap and nothing came out. As bad as that is, a dry tap is obvious. You notice it immediately and you start looking for bottled water, aid trucks, anything. Contamination is different. Contamination is silent. The water still flows. It looks like water, it feels like water, and unless the smell is extreme, most people never know the difference. But inside that perfectly clear glass, the chemistry has changed. And that's where the real nightmare starts. Countries don't send untreated river water straight into people's kitchens. Treatment plants rely on a cocktail of chemicals, disinfectants, coagulants, pH adjusters, to turn raw, sometimes dirty water into something safe enough for babies, the elderly, and hospital patients. Chlorine-based disinfectants kill bacteria and viruses. Coagulation agents like aluminum-based compounds help clump together dirt and other particles so they can be removed. pH chemicals keep the pipes from corroding and leaching metals. All of that is stored on site in large quantities, in big tanks, because the system needs constant dosing at scale. Now imagine one of those facilities taking a direct hit. Not a near miss, not shrapnel bouncing off the fence, but an actual impact close to where those chemicals are stored. Even if the plant wasn't the primary target, the physics don't care. Tanks rupture, liquids spill, pumps fail, pressure drops or spikes in unexpected places. And worst of all, the normal, carefully controlled dosing turns into something else entirely: uncontrolled release. Instead of a carefully measured trickle of disinfectant or coagulant, you can get a sudden surge of concentrated chemicals pushed into sections of the network that were never meant to see those levels. At safe dosing levels, chlorine in drinking water is a good thing. It keeps people alive by killing microbes. But push it far above that level, and you're no longer talking about routine disinfection. You're talking about a toxic exposure that can burn tissue, trigger violent gastrointestinal reactions, and stress vulnerable organs. The same goes for aluminum-based compounds. In small, controlled doses, they play a practical role in treatment. In large, uncontrolled doses, they become a problem, especially for the very young, the very old, and people with health conditions that leave them less able to cope with sudden shocks to their system. Here's where it gets even more disturbing. These systems are monitored. Israel, like other advanced states, tracks its water quality through sensors, lab tests, and automated alarms, especially during wartime. If a major facility is struck, and if those chemicals end up where they shouldn't be, it doesn't go completely unnoticed. Spikes in chlorine, shifts in turbidity, changes in flow or pressure. These are the kinds of anomalies that trigger alerts in control rooms and labs. So while the public may still be filling kettles and mixing baby formula, somebody somewhere in the system will see that something is off. They may not know the full picture in the first 5 minutes, but they'll know enough to realize that the water can't just be treated as business as usual. The question is not whether the data exists. The question is what happens after those readings come in. Does a warning go out? Is there a do not drink advisory? Are hospitals told to prepare for contamination exposure? Or does the response shift from public health to public relations, quiet meetings, political calculations, and a desperate hope that the problem can be fixed before anyone notices? Think about what's happening inside hospitals at the same time. Emergency rooms and intensive care units have already been dealing with missile casualties, blast injuries, shock, and chronic conditions made worse by power cuts and constant stress. Staff are exhausted, beds are full. Then, slowly, another wave begins to arrive. People show up with nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and severe diarrhea. On paper, those symptoms could be explained a dozen different ways: stress, bad food, infections spreading in overcrowded shelters. If no one tells the doctors that there was a contamination event in the water system, how many of them will immediately jump to chemical exposure as the cause? That misalignment between what the system knows and what the front line sees is where lives get lost, not in a dramatic instant, but in a slow, confused, preventable way. If medical staff aren't told there's a water issue, they treat the symptoms, not the source. They rehydrate, they calm stomachs, they run standard tests, but they don't ask the one question that changes everything. What did you drink, and where did it come from? It might take hours or days before someone notices that a pattern is emerging across different neighborhoods served by the same network. Those hours are the price of silence. And remember, this is not happening in peacetime. It's unfolding in the middle of a broader confrontation where infrastructure on both sides is being deliberately targeted. Israel has been accused for years of using water as leverage in Gaza and other territories, knocking out facilities or restricting access in ways that human rights groups say amount to weaponizing a basic necessity. Now, Israel itself is on the receiving end of attacks aimed at its own lifelines, including water networks, pumping stations, and reservoirs. When warfare expands from tanks and jets to pipes and taps, the boundary between battlefield and home dissolves. Iran, for its part, appears to be shifting its strategy. Analysts note that recent strikes have gone after more than just symbolic or military targets. Energy plants, data centers, and water infrastructure have all found themselves in the crosshairs. It sends a message: if you hit our critical systems, we can hit yours too. That doesn't mean every strike is perfectly planned or precise, but the pattern is hard to ignore. One day, it's a reservoir in Iran bombed by foreign jets. The next, it's a water main in central Israel ruptured by an Iranian missile. This back-and-forth escalation doesn't just threaten soldiers, it threatens civilians who had no say in any of it. So why would any government stay quiet in the face of a potential contamination crisis? The logic is cold, but not complicated. Admitting that the water isn't safe to drink means triggering mass panic. It means rushes on bottled water, empty shelves, and possibly unrest in cities that are already under psychological and physical stress. It means admitting a failure, that the system meant to protect civilians didn't. For leaders who have spent weeks projecting control, strength, and resilience, that's a devastating narrative. From a political perspective, delay can feel tempting. You tell yourself that the problem is being handled behind the scenes, that engineers are flushing lines, isolating sections of the network, and testing levels. You hope that by the time you do speak publicly, you'll be able to say, yes, there was a problem, but we fixed it, and here's what we've done to make sure it never happens again. That sounds better than, stop drinking your tap water right now, we don't know exactly how bad it is yet. But the problem is that the water doesn't wait for your talking points to be ready. Every hour that passes is an hour in which people keep drinking, cooking, and bathing in something they would avoid instantly if they knew the truth. International organizations are watching all of this in real time. Groups like the World Health Organization and various humanitarian monitors have been tracking damage to water infrastructure across the region from Gaza to Iran to Israel itself. They understand that you can rebuild a broken pipe or a bombed plant, but it's far harder to rebuild trust once people start thinking that their own leaders knowingly let them drink something dangerous. At some point, if the data shows a serious risk and local authorities don't speak out, outside voices will. That's when the political problem becomes impossible to manage, when a foreign body steps in and tells your citizens what you already knew but chose not to say. And that brings us to the core moral question that hangs over this entire story. In a war where both sides are increasingly targeting infrastructure, where missiles fall not just on barracks but on desalination plants, power stations, and data centers, where is the red line? At what point does strategic silence by a government, waiting, calculating, hoping, cross over into something else entirely? Negligence toward the people whose lives depend on information that you already have? It's one thing to fail to stop a missile, it's another to fail to warn people about what that missile did after it hit. Once monitoring systems show contamination, once labs confirm abnormal levels of chemicals, once hospitals begin seeing patterns that match exposure, the moral weight of staying silent grows heavier by the minute. And that weight doesn't disappear when the immediate crisis passes. It lingers in medical records, in unexplained illnesses, and in the quiet suspicion that when things got serious, politics mattered more than people. This is not just an Israeli story or an Iranian story. It's a warning about where modern warfare is going. We're moving into an era where attacking lifelines, water, power, data, becomes as normal as attacking tanks or airfields. When that happens, every country with a tap, a light switch, or a phone signal becomes a potential front line, and every government, no matter which side it's on, will face the same choice: protect the narrative or protect the people. So here's the uncomfortable question that this crisis forces all of us to ask. If a government's own systems show that the water its citizens are drinking may no longer be safe, how long can it stay quiet before that silence isn't just a strategy, but a betrayal? And when the next wave of patients walks into crowded hospitals with symptoms that don't quite fit the usual patterns, will anyone dare to ask whether the real damage from these missiles isn't just in the craters on the ground, but in the glasses on kitchen tables? Let me know what you think. If leaders choose silence while people keep drinking, is that still defense, or does it cross a line that can't be justified by war, security, or politics? If you want more deep dives into how modern conflicts are quietly turning water, power, and food into hidden battlegrounds, make sure you stick around, because what's happening now may be just the beginning of a much bigger shift in how wars are fought and who pays the price. What angle do you want the next script to focus on? Israel's internal political decision-making, Iran's infrastructure strategy, or civilian survival inside these damaged cities?